What happens when one of country music's biggest stars steps into the lion's den of daytime television and refuses to back down from one of the most outspoken hosts in America? Get ready to witness a confrontation that will leave you speechless. One of the most intense moments ever captured on live TV. Trust me, you won't believe how it all plays out. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. This story is absolutely wild from beginning to end. Blake Shelton walked into the View studio, his usual confident swagger on display, flashing that signature grin as he took his seat. The audience erupted in applause, clearly excited to see the country superstar. Whoopi Goldberg greeted him warmly, and the conversation started off smoothly, with talk of his latest album and upcoming tour dates. But then, Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression turning more serious. "Blake, I have to ask you about some comments you made recently regarding the music industry and political correctness. A lot of people found them pretty controversial," Joy said. Her voice sharp, Blake's smile didn't falter, but there was an edge to his tone as he replied, "Well, Joy, I think people are tired of being told what they can and can't say. Country music has always been about telling the truth, even when it makes people uncomfortable." Joy wasn't backing down either. "But don't you think artists have a responsibility to be mindful of their platform? Your words reach millions of people, and those millions are smart enough to think for themselves," she countered. Blake shot back, his voice growing firmer. "They don't need celebrities or TV hosts telling them what to believe." The tension in the room grew thick. Whoopi tried to redirect the conversation, bringing up Blake's experience on The Voice, but Joy wasn't done yet. "I find it interesting that you talk about truth-telling when country music has historically excluded so many voices," Joy pressed, her voice rising. "How do you reconcile that with your comments about authenticity?" Blake's jaw tightened. "You know what, Joy? I think you might be confusing country music with something else. Country music has always welcomed anyone who can tell a good story and mean it when they sing. We don't care about your background. We care about your heart." "Really?" Joy shot back. "Because the statistics say otherwise. The industry has been criticized for years for a lack of diversity." Blake scoffed. "Statistics? You want to talk about statistics? Let me tell you what I see when I'm out on tour. I see people from every walk of life singing along to the same songs, crying at the same stories, laughing at the same jokes. That's what matters, not some numbers on a piece of paper." The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the growing conflict. Sarah Haynes tried to jump in with a lighter question, but Blake's frustration was clear. "And furthermore," Blake continued, pointing a finger at Joy, "I'm getting real tired of people like you sitting in your ivory towers, telling the rest of us how we should live our lives and what we should think. You don't speak for country music fans, and you sure don't speak for America." Joy's eyes flashed with anger. "Excuse me, people like me? What exactly does that mean, Blake?" "It means people who think they know better than everyone else," Blake shot back without hesitation. "People who look down on folks from small towns and rural areas like we're all just a bunch of ignorant hillbillies." The studio went dead silent. The warmth in the room evaporated. Whoopi frantically tried to regain control, but both Blake and Joy were locked in their confrontation. "I've never called anyone ignorant," Joy retorted. "But I do think we need to have honest conversations about representation and inclusion." "Honest conversations?" Blake laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels more like an interrogation. You invited me here supposedly to talk about music, but all you want to do is lecture me about politics." The cameras were capturing every tense moment. The production team was scrambling, trying to manage the escalating situation. This was live television at its most unpredictable. Joy slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the stunned studio. "You know what, Blake? I've been doing this for decades, and I don't need some country singer coming on here and telling me how to do my job." Blake leaned back, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. And I don't need some talk show host who's never set foot in Nashville telling me about my industry. You want to talk about inclusion? Let's talk about how you include country music on this show. When's the last time you had a country artist on here who wasn't being grilled about politics? That's not true, Joy snapped back. We've had plenty of country artists. Name 3 from the last 2 years, Blake challenged, crossing his arms. Joy opened her mouth, then paused. The silence was deafening. That's what I thought, Blake said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. You don't actually care about country music or the people who make it. You just want to use us as punching bags when it's convenient for your agenda. Whoopi tried to step in. Blake, let's take a step back here. I think we're all getting a little heated. But Blake was on fire now, his Oklahoma accent growing more pronounced. No, Whoopi, I'm tired of taking steps back. I'm tired of watching people in the media trash country music and the people who love it. We're not your enemy, but you sure seem determined to make us out to be. Joy regained her composure and shot back. Nobody's calling you the enemy, Blake, but when you make statements that can be interpreted as exclusionary, people are going to call that out. Exclusionary? Blake's voice boomed. Lady, I've spent my entire career trying to bring people together through music. Blake fired back, his voice steady, but laced with intensity. I've mentored singers from every background you can imagine on The Voice. I've collaborated with artists across every genre. What have you done to bring people together, besides divide them on this show every single day? The studio fell into complete silence, the weight of Blake's words hanging in the air. Many in the audience looked visibly uncomfortable as they witnessed the verbal clash unfold. Sonny Hostin attempted to mediate, but Joy cut her off sharply. How dare you question what I've done? Joy snapped, her voice rising with indignation. I've been fighting for civil rights and equality long before you were even famous. Fighting? Blake scoffed bitterly, shaking his head. Is that what you call sitting behind this desk and throwing stones at people? Where I come from, fighting means getting your hands dirty, not just running your mouth. Joy's face turned pale, and for a moment, the room was electric with tension. You need to watch your tone with me, young man, she warned, her eyes narrowing. Or what? Blake challenged, leaning forward in his chair with a dangerous calm. You'll cancel me? You'll write some scathing article about how terrible I am? Go ahead, Joy. I've been in this business long enough to know that controversy sells records. Alyssa Farah Griffin tried desperately to steer the conversation in another direction. Blake, let's talk about your charity work. I know you've done a lot for disaster relief, but Blake wasn't listening. His eyes were locked onto Joy, his frustration boiling over. You know what the real problem is here? You can't stand the fact that there are still places in America where people think differently than you do. You can't stand that country music represents values and ideas that don't align with your worldview. That's not true, Joy protested weakly, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Isn't it? Blake pressed, leaning in closer. Then why do you and people like you constantly attack everything we stand for? Our music, our beliefs, our way of life. You act like we're some kind of disease that needs to be cured. Joy's anger reignited, her voice rising again. Nobody's attacking your way of life, Blake. But when your way of life involves looking down on others or excluding people, then yes, that's going to be criticized. Blake shook his head in disgust, his frustration mounting. There you go again, he said, his tone dripping with contempt. Putting words in my mouth, making assumptions about who I am and what I believe. You don't know me, Joy. You don't know where I come from, or what I've been through, but you're perfectly comfortable sitting there judging me based on some stereotype you have in your head. The production team was clearly in a panic, with stage managers frantically communicating through their headsets, trying to figure out how to diffuse the escalating confrontation. This was live television spiraling completely out of control. and it felt like there was no way to reel it back in. Joy stood up from her chair, her face flushed with anger. "You want to know what I know about you, Blake?" she said, her voice shaking with fury. "I know you have a platform that reaches millions, and instead of using it responsibly, you use it to perpetuate division." Blake shot to his feet as well, towering over the table. "Perpetuate division? That's rich, coming from someone who makes a living stirring up controversy every single day. At least I bring people joy with my music." "What do you bring, besides anger and resentment?" "I bring truth," Joy shot back, her voice shaking even more now. "I bring accountability, something you clearly aren't familiar with." "Truth?" Blake scoffed bitterly. "Your version of truth, maybe, but here's some real truth for you, Joy. The people you claim to represent, the working-class Americans you say you're fighting for, they're the same people buying my records and coming to my concerts. They don't need you to speak for them." Whoopi, sensing the tension, tried desperately to restore order. "Okay, everyone, let's just take a breath. We're all adults here. We can disagree without it getting personal." But Blake wasn't done. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, carrying more weight than his earlier shouting. "You know what's really sad about this whole thing, Joy? You could have had a real conversation with me today. You could have asked me about my music, about the stories behind my songs, about the fans who come up to me with tears in their eyes, telling me how my music helped them through tough times. Instead, you chose to ambush me with gotcha questions and political talking points." Joy sat back down, but her posture remained defiant. "I asked you legitimate questions about statements you made publicly. If you can't handle being questioned about your own words, maybe you shouldn't make those statements." "Handle it?" Blake's voice rose again, his frustration building. "Lady, I can handle anything you throw at me. But I'm not going to sit here and let you twist my words and paint me as something I'm not. I've spent my entire career treating people with respect, regardless of their background, their politics, or anything else. Can you say the same?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy opened and closed her mouth several times, struggling to find a response. Finally, she said, "I have dedicated my life to fighting for equality and justice." But her voice lacked its earlier fire. "Fighting for your version of equality," Blake interrupted. "Your version of justice? But what about the millions of Americans who don't see the world the way you do? Where's their representation on this show? Where's their voice in your fight for equality?" Sarah Haynes stepped in, trying again to mediate. "Blake, I think what Joy is trying to say is that everyone deserves to be heard and included." Blake turned his attention to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "And I agree with that completely, Sarah. But inclusion works both ways. It means including people from small towns and rural areas, too. It means not automatically assuming someone's a bigot just because they live in Oklahoma, Tennessee, or Alabama." Joy couldn't stay quiet. "Nobody's assuming anything about anyone based on where they live." "Aren't you?" Blake challenged, turning back to her. "Because every time country music gets mentioned on this show, it's accompanied by some snide comment about backward thinking or outdated values. Every time someone from the South or the Midwest is brought up, there's this underlying assumption that they must be ignorant or prejudiced." "That's not true," Joy insisted, though her protest sounded weak. "It absolutely is true," Blake fired back. "And you know what the worst part is? You're perpetuating the very kind of stereotyping and prejudice you claim to be fighting against. You're just doing it to people you think it's okay to look down on." The studio was dead silent now. Even the audience seemed to be holding their breath, transfixed by this raw, unfiltered confrontation. Blake shook his head slowly, his anger giving way to something resembling disappointment. "You know, Joy," he began, his voice softer but still heavy with emotion, "I came on this show hoping to have a real conversation. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could find some common ground. But all you wanted was a fight." "I wanted honesty," Joy replied quietly. "No," Blake said firmly. "You wanted to prove a point. You wanted to make me the villain in your story. Well, congratulations. You got your confrontation. I hope it was worth it. Joy's face went pale as Blake's words hit their mark. She sat in stunned silence for several seconds before finding her voice again. You think I wanted this to happen? You think I enjoy confrontation? I think you live for it, Blake replied without hesitation, slowly sitting back down but maintaining his intense stare. I think controversy is your brand, and you'll manufacture it wherever you can find it. That's completely unfair, Joy protested, her voice cracking slightly. I ask the questions that need to be asked. I hold people accountable. Blake leaned forward again, his voice becoming more measured but no less intense. Accountable to who, Joy? To you? To this show? Or to the millions of people whose lives and values you dismiss every single day? Whoopi tried once more to salvage the interview. Blake, I think we've gotten off track here. Can we please just focus on your music? But Blake wasn't ready to let it go. His eyes never left Joy as he continued. You want to know what's really ironic about all this? Country music is probably the most inclusive genre there is when it comes to storytelling. We sing about everybody. The factory worker, the farmer, the single mom, the veteran coming home from war, the kid from the wrong side of the tracks trying to make something of himself. We don't exclude anyone from our stories. Joy finally found her fire again. But you do exclude people from your industry. The numbers don't lie, Blake. The numbers, Blake repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. You keep coming back to numbers like they tell the whole story. But numbers don't capture the heart of what we do. Numbers don't show the kid in rural Mississippi who picked up a guitar because he heard one of my songs. Numbers don't show the dreams we inspire or the hope we give people. Hope? Joy scoffed. What hope are you giving to young women trying to break into country music? What hope are you giving to artists of color who can't get radio play? Blake's composure finally cracked completely. He stood up again, moving closer to Joy's side of the table. You want to talk about hope? I've mentored more diverse artists on The Voice than this show has probably featured in its entire run. I've used my platform to lift up people from every background imaginable. But that doesn't fit your narrative, does it? The security team was clearly on high alert now, though Blake made no threatening moves. His anger was purely verbal, but it was more intense than anything The View had ever experienced during a live broadcast. Don't you dare lecture me about giving people hope, Blake continued, his voice shaking with emotion. Do you know how many letters I get from fans telling me my music helped them through divorce, depression, losing a job, or losing a loved one? Do you know how many people tell me country music saved their lives? Joy's defiance was wavering, but she pressed on. I'm not diminishing that, Blake, but you can't ignore the systemic issues in the industry. Systemic issues? Blake exploded. You want to talk about systemic issues? How about the systemic bias against country music in mainstream media? How about the systematic way shows like this one portray country artists and country fans as ignorant or backwards? How about the systematic exclusion of country music from award shows and major cultural events? The other hosts were completely silent now, watching this verbal bloodbath unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. This was uncharted territory for daytime television. Blake wasn't finished. You sit there in your bubble in New York City, surrounded by people who think exactly like you do, and you have the audacity to lecture me about inclusion. When's the last time you spent time in a small town, Joy? When's the last time you had a real conversation with someone who disagrees with your politics? I talk to people who disagree with me every day, Joy replied weakly. No, you argue with them, Blake corrected. There's a difference. Talking means listening. It means trying to understand. It means showing respect for people even when you disagree with them. Joy's voice was barely above a whisper. Now I do show respect, do you? Blake challenged. Because nothing about this interview has felt respectful to me. Nothing about the way you've approached this conversation suggests that you have even the slightest interest in understanding my perspective or the perspectives of the people I represent. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras clicking, capturing every moment of this extraordinary confrontation. Blake took a deep breath and regained some control over his emotions. You know what the saddest part about all this is, Joy? We probably agree on more things than we disagree on. We both care about people. We both want to see everyone have opportunities to succeed. We both believe in the power of art and entertainment to bring people together. But instead of finding that common ground, you chose to make this about politics and division. Joy looked genuinely shaken now, her earlier bravado completely gone. I never meant for it to go this way. Maybe you didn't, Blake said, his voice softening slightly.